So now I'm happy to introduce our two speakers today. We have Ruth Whaley, who's the Director of Public Education and Visitor Services here at the Cathedral, and Marsha Ra, who is a longtime member of our worship and community here at the Cathedral. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ruth, who's going to get us started.
Thanks, Emma. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. As Emma said, I'm the director of the Cathedral's Public Education and Visitor Services Department, so it's a real pleasure to be here with you all to share a little bit more about this piece that we have in the cathedral. And for my portion, I'm excited to go through the making of this piece, sort of the physical creation of it, the whatever we do know. And then we'll chat a little bit about how this piece came to be at the cathedral. So that's my plan, and then I'll pass the mic over to Marsha Ra after that. So I'm going to be sharing my screen to look at images that I've put together. So I'm hoping everyone can see this as it kind of loads on your screen successfully. If you're having a hard time, please feel free to send a message to Emma, and she can help troubleshoot that. So to help us set the scene, I hope many of you have had a chance to see this art piece in person, but in case you have not, this is the Chapel of St. Columba, which is in the east end of the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City. And the art piece that we're talking about is this what's called a triptych, this three-paneled piece. This is a close-up version on the right at the very back of the chapel. So it's on the altar in the chapel itself. And this is a piece that was created by the artist Keith Haring in the year 1990. So to help set our scene a little bit, right? This is a close-up look. As Emma said, we'll be coming back to look much more closely at this piece towards the end of our time together today. But in case you haven't had a chance to see it before, this is what we're going to be talking about today. So to help set the scene, as I said, we're plopping ourselves down in the year 1990, and we're in Manhattan. Um, and we've got a few kind of key players here that we're going to be talking about. So these are just some images that I found. These aren't in the cathedral archives, but this is Keith Haring and Yoko Ono, who both play kind of a large role in the creation of this piece. And the third person that played a really important role was an interior designer named Sam Havitoy, who was working in and around New York City at the same time, was a very close friend of Yoko Ono, and that's how these three sort of got together. So Sam Havitoy was working as an interior designer in Keith Haring's new apartment in Manhattan in the late 80s and turning into 1990. And the story that we've heard is that they were plastering over a fireplace in Keith's apartment. Keith didn't like the fireplace. They were plastering over it. And so Sam Havitoy, the interior designer, suggested that Keith do some artwork in the wet plaster. And this was the first time that Keith Haring had had a chance to do this sort of art medium play, art by subtraction, of sort of scooping out and carving out the plaster. And he got really into it. He enjoyed it a lot. And so from there, they started bringing clay trays into the apartment to do sort of panels and other sort of work. And then Keith Haring realized he'd like to continue experimenting with this. So he got himself set up in Yoko Ono's apartment in the Dakota. And Sam Havitoy brought over more and more trays, and the apartment just sort of filled up with trays of clay to start putting this together. We do have a few really special photographs from the creation time, which I'm really happy to share with you. Um, the other thing that's kind of important to keep in mind is that most of these trays were just rectangles of clay. And Herring was working with mostly nature carvings and sort of loose shapes. But on a whim, Sam Havitoy brought in one tray that was shaped like a Russian icon that he'd seen in Geneva. And he thought, well, we'll play with a different shape and we'll see what happens. And that's really where our story for this triptych begins, was with that creation. And I have it's a little lengthy, but I think it's really powerful quote from Sam about this work time. Okay, so I'll share it with you. Instead of a brush, for the first time, Keith used a loop knife That's the tool that you see in his hand there. He handled the knife freely and spontaneously, like he wielded his brushes. As he worked, he became more and more excited. He made no preliminary drawings, yet he felt completely sanguine as he cut into the clay. The images came directly from his head. He placed the knife in the clay and carved a continuous running line, a quarter of an inch deep groove, which wound like a swollen stream through a spring thaw. He never stopped to rethink the line, and he never edited himself, and he never made corrections. The images were religious, an inspiration of the life of Christ, a baby held by a pair of hands, hands ascending toward heaven, Christ on the cross. On one side panel, he depicted the resurrection, and on the other, a fallen angel. When Keith finished, as he stepped back and gazed at this work, he said, "Man, this is really heavy." When he stopped, he was exhausted, and it was the first time I realized how frail he had become. He was completely out of breath, and he said, "When I'm working, I'm fine, but as soon as I stop, it hits me." So he made what would become our triptych in a relatively short period of time. When you're working with this kind of medium, you work very quickly. And he finished carving the clay, and then somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks later, he died. The date kind of is a little murky depending on whose account you're reading. But he died very shortly thereafter. It was, as far as we know, the last kind of significant piece that he ever worked on. And he didn't live to see it cast in bronze and then covered in white gold. So he really just saw it in its pure clay form. And it was finished later by kind of assistants and students and cast in those different ways. So Keith Haring died in the spring of 19, excuse me, in the kind of early winter of 1990. And then his memorial was held at the Cathedral in May of 1990. This is an order of service that I found, which I just thought might be of interest to folks. And from here, we're going to enter a little bit of guesswork in the history of the triptych, trying to figure out sort of motivations and these kinds of decisions is not easy detective work. So I've pulled together the best that I can, but I hope everyone sort of takes this with a grain of salt. And if you were around the cathedral community at the time, as I know some of you were, I'm hoping there will be an opportunity if you feel empowered to share as we move through this afternoon, right? But from what I've been able to put together, the altarpiece that we're talking about, right? I said there were 9 editions made. So we have one of the 9 at St. John the Divine. And it was a little unclear to me how the decision came to bring this piece to us. But what we do know is that Yoko Ono was good friends with Paul Moore, who's part of the cathedral leadership in the 70s. And so it makes sense to me that that relationship sort of continued through the years, through the cathedral's civic engagement and activism and things like that. And we know that she was very involved, of course. It was the making of this piece was in her apartment. So it sort of makes sense to me that that's part of where the bridge to the connection came from. There's likely more to it than that, but we know that for sure, right? And we also know that Haring didn't make this piece for any specific locations. It wasn't like he wasn't motivated to, oh, I want to see this one in the Met. I want to see this one in this church. I want to see this one. That wasn't the goal behind it. This was much more kind of free acting right at the end of his life. So the decision to donate the piece actually was made by the estate of Keith Haring, the Keith Haring Foundation, in conjunction with Sam Habitoy, who was that interior designer I mentioned. He became the publisher of this piece. So the art publisher is the person that helps these pieces get out of the artist's showroom and into kind of more enduring homes. And what the Haring Foundation executive said at the time is that they said Keith's last sculpture is such an unusual work, so beautiful, so classical, that it really belongs in a church. This foundation is still active today, so you can certainly look them up and support their work. It's really important. In 1994, the piece was dedicated at the cathedral. So we found a few images taken by Mary Bloom, who was a longtime photographer at the cathedral. It was dedicated on June 28th, 1994. And originally, the piece was in the Chapel of St. Savior, which is a different chapel than where it lives now. It's just the neighboring chapel. That tells us it has moved around a few times during its life here so far at the cathedral. And Yoko Ono gave a speech, which I wanted to pull a piece out of. I think it's really powerful. This large image on the left side of your screen is Yoko Ono and Dean Morton. And then you can see in the upper right an image including those two plus Bishop Grein. So it's really the cathedral's kind of top leadership that was here at the dedication. Yoko said this: Keith came into my life just when I needed a friend like him. I liked his relaxed attitude of walking into new ventures without fear. The altarpiece was his last new venture. Keith decided that he'd like to do the work in my apartment in the Dakota in January of 1990, which was quiet and relaxing. It was obvious that his body was feeling weaker, but his spirit was strong as ever. I was sad but amazed by Keith's determination to take on such a large and entirely new project at that point in his life. I hope that this altarpiece will give courage and hope to many, many people who are still fighting the battle. Bless you for your anger. Bless you for your sorrow. Bless you for your strength to stay alive. Bless you, bless you, bless you. And my hope is that folks still feel that way when they come in. It's one of the reasons why we've kept it so prominently displayed throughout the cathedral. Dean Morton said this in a New York Times article that was reporting on the dedication. He said, "It's an amazing work. You have resurrection, death, and birth in one very powerful image. It's the only religious thing he ever did, and the last, which says something about where people's hearts are at the end." We're going to come back to revisit the piece itself in a little bit, but it's my great pleasure to hand the mic over to Marsha Ra, who's our kind of longtime member of the worshiping community, to share some of her memories from this time.
Well, thank you very much, Ruth. I was asked to talk about what the cathedral was like during the AIDS epidemic. And when you ask someone 83 to talk about memories, it's just what they do all the time. So I was very happy to do it. And I have to say that I shed a lot of tears as I did it and remembered all the people that we lost. I was an acolyte in the 80s when the epidemic hit. And we first heard about it if we read the Times in 81. And I don't think any of us understood that we would be affected by it. And unlike, in some ways it's better, some ways worse than the epidemic we've just been through. With COVID, anyone could get it. Anyone could get it. So everyone was affected and everyone was terrified. Most of the people who died were elderly. With AIDS, most of the people who died were very young. And the people who got it in three ways, mostly through sex, at least in the United States, or they got it through blood transfusions or because they were drug addicted. And that was it. You could not get AIDS by hugging a friend who had it. And I think it's extremely interesting the way the cathedral community and the cathedral hierarchy responded, which was extremely loving. That's all I can say. Our first experience as acolytes was one Sunday when an acolyte didn't show up. And in my memory, this was 1981, it might have been 82, but it was very early on. And he was a resident in ophthalmology. He was 25. And another fellow who was an ophthalmologist said, "Oh, what happened to Bob is he went home, he was very tired, he hadn't been taking good care of himself, he got pneumonia and he died over the weekend." Just like that. The man was 25. We couldn't believe it. What 25-year-old man in good health dies over the weekend? But that's what happened. And a few weeks later, another acolyte showed up who had not been showing up for a while. And he asked me permission to serve again. And I didn't understand why he needed my permission. And I said, "Okay, we'll come back next week and be an acolyte." Well, he never came back. He just went home and died. And over the next 10 years or so, we lost at least, I'll put it this way, there are 18 people in the columbarium, which is where we deposit ashes at the cathedral. There are at least 18 people that I know personally who died of AIDS. So, and there were others who died or are not in the columbarium. And so it was really a difficult time. And in 1985, the cathedral started to do formal memorial services. They had one huge memorial service in November of 85 where they dedicated the memorial, the AIDS Memorial Bay, which is the medical bay dedicated originally to St. Luke, who's the physician. And Bishop Moore presided at that. I was not there, but I heard that it was over 1,000 people came, and there was a lot of crying and a lot, as you could imagine. And they decided they would do this memorial book. And what I didn't realize until I got ready for this is that it was really a national AIDS memorial. The book is national, and the names just kept rolling in, hundreds and hundreds of names, and they were inscribed in this book. And the beautiful tapestry, not tapestry, well, it's like, I don't know what you would call it, tapestry was created that's in the AIDS Bay to this day, and it was put there. And after that original memorial service, they had services the last Saturday of the month, every month, memorial services in that bay or near that bay, until it was no longer a death sentence and things settled down, which would have been by the mid-90s. And I think probably because the cathedral was so open and so willing to just embrace people who had AIDS and embrace people who lost people who had AIDS, and there was no stigma, there was no judgment. And I have to say that very strongly. I was in a profession where there was also a lot of AIDS. I was a librarian, and there was a lot of embarrassment and a lot of judgment. That did not happen at the cathedral at all. That's my memory of it. When we learned how it was passed and that we couldn't catch it by holding hands, we were able to really be loving to our friends who were so sick. But once this got out there that the cathedral had this memorial, we had people come to us who had just found out they had it. And they became part of the community, and they were with us for a year or two, and we watched them go downhill, and we said goodbye. And it was a very, very difficult time. One of the people, and I guess I could mention, if you want to show the memorial quilt at this point, at some point the congregation, very recently in 2018, decided to sort of reestablish recognizing what happened in those years. And we ordered 3 of the Names Project quilts, and one of them had the name of Gerald Chapman on it. And this is one of the cases that I remember so clearly. Gerald was British. I think his mother was Greek, and he was a director, and he had been invited to America by Joseph Papp. That's the level at which he was. And he was with us as an acolyte and spent, a couple of years with us, died in 1987 at the age of 35. And this was one of the many hard ones. I can't say any of them were easy. Another person who died that I don't have any images for was John Griggs, who had been a congregation leader and he was a writer, and he died in 1990 at age 50. Both he and his partner died within a few months of each other, and this was really heartbreaking, just heartbreaking. He was everyone was lovely, everyone was wonderful, but he was particularly wonderful. We lost one of our head vergers, Bob Davis. He's one of the people who's in the columbarium. So this was really very hard. And the congregation members, some of us went on the AIDS walks. We had, we got together. The Gay Men's Health Crisis puts on these annual AIDS marches to raise money. And I'm not sure if it's still going on after the pandemic. But anyway, this is a group of us around 1990, and there I am in the middle age 50, would you believe it? But anyway, and the tall man behind me was HIV positive at that point. I think he's the only one, but he is one of those who lived long enough to get good treatment when the protease inhibitors, whatever the new the new successful treatment showed up, and he is today 70 years old. And so I'm very thankful that we didn't lose Jim. I feel very badly. I mean, Keith Haring just missed it, just by a few years. So it's amazing that there is a cure for it now, or at least a decent treatment so people can live out a normal life. The other way that we were affected, and not quite as, not with the numbers, because we didn't know the people that well. In 1983, we started a soup kitchen, which then became CCC. It developed into this wonderful service that the cathedral still runs today. And we had two guest volunteers there, Pete Melendez and Charmaine, whom he later married. And most of the guests we didn't get to know very well, but Pete was a guest volunteer, and he was extremely helpful to us. And he also was a drug addict, which is not something I understood at the time, but that was the truth. And he got AIDS, and then his wife got it, and they both are in the columbarium. And that was another very, very painful thing. I have no idea how many of the guests who came were affected, but it just shows that we were not just affected by losing all of our lovely acolytes and all the guys, because it was all guys. We lost Charmaine too. And I would also say that Charles Pridemore, who was in charge of outreach, he was a priest who was in charge of outreach, he hired both Pete and Charmaine, and they became staff members to what later became CCC. So I think you can see that the cathedral was absolutely wonderful in how it dealt with this terrible tragedy. And I'm very, very thankful that it's a memory. People are still living with it, but they're living with it. I'm very thankful for that. So thank you for the chance to do a little memoir here. Thank you all.
Thank you, Marsha. I think now we're going to turn it back over to Ruth, who's going to kind of lead us through a closer look at the triptych, and there'll be a chance for everyone to share some reflections on that.
Absolutely. So we'll pull this back up. Great. All righty. So one of the ways that we wanted to spend some time together as a group, having heard such fantastic memories from Marsha, thank you for sharing that, and maybe learning a little bit more about the making of this piece and the history of this piece, is we wanted to take some time to really look at it together. I'll preface this by saying that if you have an opportunity to visit the cathedral after this chat and visit this piece in person, I really encourage you to do so. But I think we can take some time together as a group to just spend some time looking at a beautiful piece of art and a beautiful piece of the cathedral's history. So the way that I think this will work best is I have this kind of one image of the whole piece, and then I do have some close zoomed in images of kind of the four quadrants of this image. So we've got a chance and an ability to look very closely. And I just wanted to open this up to the room to just ask the question. Let's all take maybe 30 seconds. I'll time us. It'll feel really long, but I promise it'll only be 30 seconds to just look in silence at this piece here. And I'll stop my mutterings for those 30 seconds. Thank you. We'll continue to look, but I'd love to open the floor to hear from some folks. Feel free to use the chat if that's most comfortable, or if you'd rather sort of raise a hand or unmute yourself. I think we should be able to manage that okay. I'd love to know what you notice. What stands out to you?
I can break the ice if we like. I think
Sure.
whenever I have, of course, work at the cathedral, so I I frequently spend time with this piece, and I think I don't know why, but something about it that stands out to me is the figures at the bottom, particularly I think in the right side of it. Something about the positions of their arms, and it feels like there's different ways of looking at it. It feels like people are like kind of shaking their fists, and it's like it could look like anger, it could look like excitement and triumph, and I don't know. I think there's something about this that always draws my eyes. Yeah, it's especially that far right figure, especially with their arm kind of bent. I think
Mm,
yeah, that's something that always stands out to me when I look at this, because you can look at it in different ways.
absolutely. Thanks, Emma. Yeah, it's there's a lot of motion. And I saw Michael Wolf in the chat, like noting that there's just a lot of people, a lot of people. They're crowded from edge to edge, and they're all moving. Absolutely. You get a different mood. And I think I'm going to zoom quickly through these here so you can these folks here, right? Fantastic.
Hey Ruth, I'll jump in too. And it's great that you picked, oh, go back one where you were. Every time I see this piece, I see something different in it. And I have stared at this piece so many times. We did it close looking, standing there. And I swear I have never noticed that sun before coming out from under the baby on the far left on that screen.
Okay.
With the rain,
Yeah.
I've noticed the raindrops, but that sun for some reason really speaks to me today, and it's just so powerful and beautiful. But something new every time I look at this piece.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Christine. Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, I've given tours of the cathedral, as some of you know, and I've shown this to a lot of visitors. And I always ask them, "What do you think? How do you think those people feel down there?
Yeah.
And what do you think they're doing?" And the answers are all over the map. Some people think they're protesting. Some people think they're rioting. Other people think they're rejoicing. Um, Personally, the association I have is I know Keith Haring was part of that disco scene in the 1970s, and so what I see is a disco.
Love that. Feels exuberant to you.
Yeah, yeah, very much.
Sick. What more can we find? What more can we see here? One of my favorite things that I'd worked here for years before I noticed was back it up a little bit here, that he signed it in this upper right-hand corner with just the circle and the cross through it. Very touching.
One thing that has always kind of confused me is the top center panel image. I always assume that it should be Mary holding Jesus, but I can never make out what the figure actually is.
Broad shot. Yeah. What about it kind of has this contradiction for you, Priscilla?
Well, it's hard to tell what's actually embracing him, what's kind of keeping him aloft. And then you have all these kind of multiple limbs. So I was never quite sure, is it a multitude of angels holding him, or yeah, I don't know. The imagery just always confused me.
Thank you. There's a lot going on, that's for sure. Daniel Romero, go ahead.
Thank you. It's Priscilla, I think it's interesting that you mentioned the top of the middle panel there. I have no idea what Keith's religious background or theology was. I'm not sure any of us do. But I see that kind of there, and I see kind of a Trinitarian image right there. Maybe not in the most traditional of manners, but maybe you have God, the parent figure, and maybe the heart is the Holy Spirit, and then Jesus as the child. Um, I mean, I don't know about the multiple arms there. I mean, I think alluding to the angels, like the cherubim and the seraphim, is a reasonable explanation there. But That's just what I see in that spot right there. And I think it's kind of interesting. And, if he didn't have much of a religious background or a theological background, to me, this is kind of an interesting kind of synchronicity. Because as Episcopalians, we are Trinitarian in various interpretations of that. But I think that's an interesting thing that I see in it personally.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Marsha, saw you
Yeah,
next.
what struck me this time is the directions of the energy. I mean, it looks to me like the baby, the gift of Jesus. It's like rain dropping down on us, this love coming down on us. And then when you look at the other ones, it's like the energy of people who want more, who are at least on the right. I'm not sure on the left, but on the right, this like yearning upward. It's like an upward direction. I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of the lines in between the figures, right? There's a lot of energy, and those energies are going in different directions. Absolutely. Virginia, thank you.
Keith was raised Lutheran in Pennsylvania, and his family was very active in the Lutheran churches that they belonged to. And I'm sure that's what influences a lot of his art. There's always a feeling of joy and grace, which is very much a Lutheran attribute. And you can see that in this. Just wonderful religious symbols that I know come from his Lutheran background.
Thank you for sharing that. I didn't know that. That was new information for me.
Apparently, he referred to himself as a Jesus freak, which was a term of art back then for those of us who were around in the 70s and 80s.
That's fantastic. I love that. I'm going to add that to my deepening understanding of who he was. Marvelous. Laura, go ahead.
I am so just impressed with him as an artist. I didn't really realize that he had never worked in this medium before. He was using a tool that he had not really ever used before. And to just do this free form, no plan, no sketch, I just think that's incredible. And that's nothing short of just he was inspired.
Yeah.
And to look at it now and realize that this is a piece of pure inspiration, makes it even more moving than I already find it. It's incredible.
Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. And I just am picturing him apparently like music was blasting, drinking one Coke after another, just sort of trying to keep his energy up and sitting on the floor, playing with the clay, and just letting it go. Fantastic. Layla, go ahead.
Back to the figure in the middle, I like to talk to my students actually when I have programs here, and it's really interesting to hear their views on what they see as well, especially since the really, really young students who might not even have heard of Keith Haring and have like all the background information that we have. Because even me, like I knew who he was before I came to work here, before I'd seen this piece, so I knew the graffiti pieces, but I like one of them that stood out to me that I kind of also like identified with it was that they saw the kind of baby human person figure in the middle as like kind of it's not only like a child, a baby, but also like a grown person, and it's him kind of, and it's being cradled by it's not you can tell the difference between people at the bottom and the angels, but also there's kind of a mix that's what's surrounding him. So it's everything kind of blending into one. And that heart there is, I think, what draws the eye most, because it's just the surrounding of like love and there's no definition there. And that really spoke to me when I had a young student talk about that. And I was like, yes, that's what I like to see too.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And I see a fellow Ruth in the chat said, I see a combination of nativity and pieta with the sun for birth and teardrops for death.
Ruth, this is Jean. I can't figure out how to raise my hand, but
that's all right. Go ahead, Jean.
So no one has mentioned the figures on the right and left at the top, which I would think are maybe angels or seraphim or whatever, because they have wings. But it's interesting, on the right, they're both upward facing, and of course angled because the panel is angled. But on the left, the bottom one is upside down, which almost looks like he or she is falling, or are they just tumbling? And I'm curious if anyone has thoughts about that.
Thank you. Thank you for mentioning that. And when in doing this research, I'll just add, and then I'll open it back up to the room, that the pieces that Sam Haventoy pulled out, the sort of images that he delineated, mentioned sort of one side panel depicting the resurrection and the other a fallen angel. And that's, his interpretation. So it's not that weighs any more or less than ours. But it's interesting to think about triptychs traditionally are kind of three-paneled stories, or they're related to one another, but they're often used, the panels are used to sort of delineate some distinction over time or over characters and things like that. So it's interesting to think about the medium and the history of this kind of shape as well. AJ, please go ahead.
Yes, sorry for the silly photo, but I really appreciated you reading the quote. And so I had a quote from one of his books that I remembered seeing. And so if it's okay, it's about like children and religion a little bit, if you wanted me to share that
Sure.
with the group. Yeah, okay. So he says, and this is maybe I'll read bits and pieces of it. It's a whole page, and the whole page is really good, but I'll pick out a few pieces. Okay, so he mentions it's basically like a book about he kind of like did like an oral history of his own life, which is fantastic. So I know like legacy was really important to him, and all the good work that the foundation is still doing. Okay, let's see. I'll read this part. I think a part of the reason I feel I have a responsibility as a public figure is that I know that there are always people watching, people that look up to you in a kind of way, especially young people. I would love to be a teacher because I love children, and I think that not enough people respect children or understand how important children are. I have done many projects with children of all ages. My fondest memories of those experiences. When I was 21, I spent a summer teaching art at a daycare center in Brooklyn. It was one of the most fulfilling summers of my life. There's nothing that makes me happier than making a child smile. The reason that the baby has become my logo or signature is that it's the most purest and most positive experience of human existence. Children are the bearers of life in its simplest and most joyous form. Children are colorblind and still free of all the complications, greed, and hatred that will slowly be instilled in them through life. I will never forget some of the adults that touched my life through childhood. Sometimes very brief encounters have made an impact that is very lasting and very real. If it is possible for me to have had that kind of effect on any children, I think that would have been the most important and useful thing I could have done. Touching people's lives in a positive way is as close as I can get to an idea of religion. That's
Thank
it.
you for sharing that. Fantastic. Do you mind dropping the name of that book in the chat in case it was?
Yeah, let me try to find that for y'all.
Okay, thank you.
I took a screenshot, so yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
That's I was trying to upload the whole picture, but I couldn't figure out how to do it. So, but yeah, I will try to find that.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Marie, we'll go to you.
Right. When I look at this, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, and I see the arms really kind of coming out, really kind of from each figure, for me is the acceptance, really kind of the people who have, let's say, AIDS. So it really is kind of a loving, caring, embracing, really kind of all. And, during this time, there was a lot of rejection, really, of people really kind of with AIDS. They really were really kind of, like kind of outcasts, etc., and in many churches and in many religions. So that I look at this really kind of as really kind of an acceptance, as a protection, as a shielding, as a loving really kind of gesture really with those arms. And I guess really the artists really felt that really in a way, or hoped that was really kind of what people should see or religion should be, really, that everybody really was a part, really kind of like kind of like God's grace. The other thing too, which makes me really kind of feel very good about this, is that I have had many people talk to me about the acceptance of the Episcopal Church, really kind of a variety of things. They never felt rejected. Many people came to the Episcopal Church because they felt that there was an acceptance really of them, whatever was going on with them. There was not a rejection. So that I find this a beautiful, really kind of testament, really kind of to the cathedral and the accepting nature that it has had really kind of over the years, and the willingness to speak out and speak about really kind of things which other people may shy away from. So that's how I look at this, really kind of this piece.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. I can't think of a better reflection to wrap up our time with than that. That was beautiful. I'm gonna go ahead and stop my share. I'm gonna take us away from this beautiful piece for just a moment. As I said, I hope you'll all come back and visit it. If you are interested in visiting the other pieces, I've tracked down where they live. You can do a pilgrimage to the sites. In the United States, there's one in New York City at St. John the Divine, and there's another at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco, and there's one at the Denver Art Museum in Colorado. If you're going further afield, there's one at the St. Eustace Church in Paris, France. There's one in Hiroshima, Japan. There's another in Jerusalem, in Budapest. Excuse me, there's one at the Whitney here in New York as well. Left that one off my list. And there's apparently one at an unknown church in Moscow. So that one's going to be a bit trickier to track down, but if you find it, share with the group because we'd all love to know where it ended up. Thank you again so much for spending your time with us today. I think Emma has a few words to share before we wrap up, but it's been wonderful to spend this time with you all. Go ahead, Emma.
Yes, thank you so much, Ruth, and thank you, Marsha. This has been so lovely. I learned a lot. I just want to share with the group really briefly. As you might know, the cathedral has been celebrating Pride here for many years, but particularly the last few years, we've been celebrating with an entire month of programming. And so this will be our third year of that. So I'm putting a link in the chat now that takes you to our website that has a listing of all of our upcoming Pride events this year. And I'm also just going to give you a quick rundown right now. So we're kicking off the month doing what we're calling for the last few years Pride Eve on May 31st. This year it's on a Saturday. If you're familiar with The Greedy Peasant on Instagram or TikTok, we work with him on this event, and it's an evening of celebrating self-expression and community and joy. And it's a really fantastic evening, and there's only a few tickets left. So if you are interested, I recommend you buy tickets now. The rest of our programming for the month is all free to the community. So on June 10th, we're going to have a book launch with Dan McClellan, who's a biblical scholar. You might also know him from TikTok. He has a book coming out that's titled The Bible Says So, What We Get Right and Wrong About Scripture's Most Controversial Issues. So we're going to have a book launch event with a talk between him and the Dean of the Cathedral on June 10th. On Saturday, June 14th, we have our Pride Family Picnic, inviting everyone to come to the pulpit green and bring some refreshments and a blanket and spend some time together. There will also be a performance from the Queer Big Apple Corps Marching Band, including an instrument petting zoo this year. So kids will have a chance to come up and get familiar with some of the instruments and the color guard flags, and it's going to be really joyful and fun. Following that on, I believe it's a Friday, June 20th, we have a free concert being given by the New York City Gay Men's Chorus. The title of the concert is Unapologetic, Our Celebration of Queer Black Love. And this is their free concert kind of in honor of Juneteenth and Pride. That's going to be fantastic. They were just here in March and it was incredible. The last event we have is there's a group called Gay and Sober that they have a welcome meeting traditionally every year on Saturday, the day before Pride Sunday. This year is no exception. I just looked up at my calendar. It's on Saturday the 28th. They're kind of running that event themselves. So again, more info on the website. And I'm sorry, the actual last event we have is last but certainly not least is our Pride Evensong on June 29th, featuring works by queer and trans composers and a performance by our community choir. And it's a really lovely way to wrap up the month. So We hope that you all will join us for some of those events. The last thing I am going to do is I'm going to put one more link in the chat. All of these events, except for Pride Eve, are free to our community. And so if you feel so inclined or so moved to support any of these financially, pardon the kids outside, they're having a great time. Please feel free to, go to that link and donate if you can. And any and all gifts are greatly appreciated. But we hope to see you at these events either way. So thank you, Ruth and Marsha, and thank you all for being here. And we will see you again soon. Take care.